Heathcliff, it's me, Kathy, come home. I'm so cold, let me in your window. Come on. I really do feel like that song is slept on as well as Kate Bush. And I normally do this at the end of the video, but if you want to hear more of how good of a singer I am, you can check out my music channel and original music, all under the name of Shy Fighter. Anyway, yes, this video is about Wuthering Heights by Emily Bronte, and not Wuthering Heights by Kate Bush. So I have wanted to make a video about Wuthering Heights for a while now, but I really wasn't sure what I was going to talk about. And funnily enough, with the trailer for the movie that's dropping and all the discourse surrounding it, I have been inspired by a multitude of people and ideas to make this video. In this video, I'm going to be giving a brief overview of Wuthering Heights, a brief history on Emily Bronte, my personal journey reading Wuthering Heights, and some of the major and minor themes of the book. For those that don't know, Wuthering Heights is considered a Gothic classic novel. Gothic novels are stories that have dark, bleak settings, normally involving a crumbling castle or mansion or some desolate person, place, or thing. The stories normally center around topics of isolation, loneliness, death, oppression, guilt, and madness. There can also be some supernatural aspects or a sense of suspense. I'm not gonna really be talking about my opinion of the movie or anything at all. It's just giving rage bait to me. And Wuthering Heights, if you look at the poster, Wuthering Heights is in quotes for a reason. But my personal journey with Wuthering Heights, I have read Wuthering Heights 3 times. I originally picked it up because it is, at least it used to be, advertised as a romance, and after reading it the first time I was like, I don't know who said that, but there was very little things romantic about it. And because it was one of the first classics I had ever read, it really was like reading a foreign language, I'm not gonna lie. And after having literally read it and then reread it, I still had no idea what the story was about or what Emily Bronte may have been trying to say with the story. None of the characters are likable, and the whole story is kind of sad and bleak, and Heathcliff can be funny at times, but he definitely does not intend to be. But with this video and my channel as a whole, I want to start talking about books the way I wish we talked about them in school. So I remember just kind of like being given books and it's like, we're gonna read this, and then like we're asked questions and like we write an essay about it, but we're given very little like context of the author themselves and the context of the time it was written in. I feel like for me as a reader now, it's really important to go into a book, especially classics, learning about the history of the author, the context it was written in, the time it was written in, and the major and minor themes of the story. Like how I explained what it meant for it to be a classic Gothic novel. Not too long ago, I did not know what that even meant. And obviously, as my channel has shown thus far, also talking about my personal opinion, my personal take on the book itself. I really don't feel like I review books. I just don't like calling myself a reviewer. If people call me that, I'd be like, sure, but I'm really just talking about books, I feel, and there is critical thinking involved, but this is more just like an expression and sharing of my opinion. And I guess if that's a review, then I'm reviewing it. And I have to say, with the trailer coming out, there have been a lot of different people talking about the actual themes of the book and being upset at how the story seems to be being told. And a lot of people who are smarter than me and who read more than me had a lot of good opinions about it. Specifically at Shaking Sheets on TikTok, Nia Ola, and Baskin Sons as well on TikTok. Baskin Sons is talks mostly about books, but Nia Ola talks about a range of topics, but both of them and their videos talking about it really made it clear to me what I wanted to talk about with this video. So I'm very thankful to them and their contributions to this conversation. So a brief history of Emily Bronte. Emily Bronte was born July 30th, 1818, the same year as Frederick Douglass, as well as Edgar Allan Poe was born in, I believe, 1809. So Emily Bronte, Frederick Douglass, and Edgar Allan Poe were all alive at the same time. And it's really weird to think of it like that. Emily Bronte died at the age of 30 on December 19th, 1848, 1 year after Wuthering Heights was published. Edgar Allan Poe also passed away in 1848, just 1 year after her. And Frederick Douglass passed away in 1895, so he outlived both of them significantly, funnily enough. So Emily Bronte wrote Wuthering Heights during a period of isolation, and she was focused inward creatively. She was heavily influenced by the rugged landscape of the Yorkshire moors that she lived by and would often walk along. Despite the drama of Wuthering Heights, Emily Bronte lived a quiet life. She rarely left home and was very close to her family. Unfortunately, the Bronte family was constantly impacted by illness. Emily's two older sisters, Maria and Elizabeth, died of tuberculosis, and Emily herself died not too long after her brother, who died in September of 1848, just 4 months before Emily. As an unmarried woman in the mid-19th century, Emily had very few options outside of marriage, teaching, and becoming a governess. There was a time she left home for a teaching job, but she quit only after 6 months because of how homesick she was. Emily drew heavily from the Gothic tradition. She was drawn to gloomy settings, tortured characters, and intense emotions, as shown in Wuthering Heights. Wuthering Heights was originally published under the male pseudonym Ellis Bell. Due to the content of the novel, it was not initially well received by Victorian audiences, but obviously it is now considered a classic. Bronte never knew that the novel would later be considered a masterpiece. First theme I'm going to be talking about is alienation. The state or experience of being isolated from a group or an activity to which one should belong or in which one should be involved. With all the controversy surrounding the upcoming film 50 Shades of Wuthering Heights, a lot of people have been talking about and making it very clear that this is not a story where Kathy is horny for Heathcliff. It is a story of a young, racialized boy being brought into an intolerant household that sees him as less than human, disregards him, and abuses him. And once the man who brought him there dies, his dehumanization only gets worse. And his only light is Catherine, as Heathcliff is for her as well. However, despite the love Kathy and Heathcliff share, Kathy decides she's going to marry another man who will provide her with a more comfortable life. Kathy decides she's going to marry Edgar Linton, seeing their marriage as the only way to potentially help her as well as Heathcliff get out of their situation at their home. Similarly to Emily Bronte, women had very few options in terms of social mobility outside of marriage, teaching, or being a governess. On the other hand, Heathcliff believed that Kathy should have, quote, endured misery, degradation, and death, end quote, to be with him. Men, you gotta love them. But with Heathcliff being seen as lesser as well as of a lower class, it would have been impossible for them to both have been able to be together and have a comfortable life. Heathcliff's alienation began before he is even introduced in the story. Mr. Earnshaw, Kathy's father, saw the young Heathcliff living on the streets of Liverpool and decided to bring him home out of pity. Then, despite how Mr. Earnshaw favors him, Heathcliff is constantly being mistreated and bullied by Mr. Earnshaw's son. After the death of Mr. Earnshaw, Heathcliff is demoted to being a farmhand and is no longer allowed to live in the house. Heathcliff and Catherine end up having limited time together, and despite how they care for one another, like I said before, Cathy decides she's going to marry another man. Time after time, Heathcliff is ostracized and alienated by everyone around him in one way or another. It's no wonder he puts all his time and energy into wanting to get his revenge. Heathcliff ends up going away and he literally disappears after he finds out Cathy's gonna marry someone in order to gain more fortune and prowess in the hopes of one day becoming the owner and master of Wuthering Heights, wanting to seek his revenge on everyone around him, so much so that he even marries Edgar Linton's, or Cathy's husband's, younger sister in order to try to stick it to him even more, making her life a living hell. And in terms of revenge, Heathcliff is actually pretty successful. He ends up becoming the owner of Wuthering Heights. He marries Edgar Linton's younger sister and has a child with her, all that stuff. Although his revenge ends up taking a dark turn once Cathy dies, and his revenge begins to turn even more bitter. Revenge and generational trauma. So the first thing I learned about Wuthering Heights is that it is a revenge story, and boy is it. Once Hindley becomes the head of the household, the abuse of Heathcliff grows, as well as Hindley's alcoholism, turning Wuthering Heights into hell on earth. Years later, once Heathcliff is the new master of Wuthering Heights, he turns around and starts perpetuating the same abuses that he was subjected to. It's one of the major themes of the book, but it is more of an undertone than completely overt. But the dehumanization that Heathcliff faced is the reason why his thirst for revenge grows so strong. And I have to say that anyone who reads Wuthering Heights and considers it a romance, I really think you didn't get to the point of the book. I remember going into it expecting it to be romantic, and as someone who reads a lot of romance, once I finished it, I was like, there are very few things that are romantic about this story. I honestly consider it a literary fiction because Emily Bronte's prose is very beautiful, and it is one of the best parts of the book. It has taken me reading reviews and listening to people talk about Wuthering Heights that helped me truly understand that it is the discrimination of Heathcliff that turns him into the monster he became. It is never explicitly stated in the text what race Heathcliff is, but he's described as a, quote, dark-skinned G-word, end quote, the G-word referring to Romani people. That word is considered a slur from my knowledge, so I will not be saying it. It is strongly suggested that Heathcliff is Romani, and during this period of time in history, Romani people were oppressed and discriminated against as an ethnic group, mainly due to their culture. In chapter 17, Heathcliff says to Hareton, Cathy's nephew, quote, "Now, my bonny lad, you are mine, and we'll see if one tree won't grow as crooked as another with the same wind to twist it," end quote. When all a person has known is hurt and hardship, it is no surprise that they would want to turn around and inflict that same misery and pain on anyone and everyone around them, even if it isn't the same person that inflicted the damage in the first place. That, my friends, is generational trauma. Some signs of generational trauma in the characters is Heathcliff and Cathy's codependency, Heathcliff's unhealthy attachment to Cathy, Hindley's alcoholism, the abuse Heathcliff inflicts on young Cathy and Hareton, as well as his complete and utter control over his son once he comes into his possession. Everyone who hurt Heathcliff is either no longer alive or an invalid in some way or another. But their children is what is left of them, and that family tie is close enough for Heathcliff to feel some satisfaction in the harm that he's causing. With the lack of resources at that time, it's no surprise that Heathcliff would just be projecting all of his trauma onto these poor children. And I have to say that Heathcliff's son Linton is a better representation of Heathcliff than Heathcliff himself. Despite all of his anger and hatred, on the inside, Heathcliff really is just this hurt, weak person, that same young boy that was sleeping on the streets of Liverpool. And that is shown in the weakness of spirit and lack of strength in Linton. And trauma literally passes through genetics, so it makes sense that not only with how he mistreated the mother of his child, but his own internal state as well. The next generations in this book are really a good showing, in my opinion, of like almost a take on reincarnation, and how it is a similar repeat to Kathy and Heathcliff when they were in their youth, how it shows in their children. With Wuthering Heights as his, Heathcliff's son and young Kathy being married, Edgar Linton has died. It seems like his revenge is complete and he's just an absolute terror to everyone around him. It is only after the sighting of Kathy's ghost that causes Heathcliff to give up his desire and thirst for revenge, and he really just ends up sitting around, still a little bit snappy, but just waiting for his death. It's sad but true. A lot of the times when people want their lives to end, and they may or may not have a plan to end their lives, they become the most content and happy that they've been in a while. And Heathcliff literally dies with a look of exaltation on his face. And speaking of death / ghosts, death is a major theme in a lot of Gothic novels, and it very obviously is in this one if you have read Wuthering Heights. It feels like nearly every other chapter there is someone either who is dying or who has died. Literally 10 of the characters die in Wuthering Heights, 2 of them being the main characters. The first death, Mr. Earnshaw, happened so suddenly, and Heathcliff, Kathy, Joseph, Nellie, and I think Hindley are in the room, and it's very jarring, very traumatizing for everyone involved. I don't know why I'm laughing. When Lockwood first is staying at Wuthering Heights and him interacting with Kathy's ghost and that whole scene, it is a very good hook in the beginning. I find the idea of these ghosts to be very interesting, and I honestly wish there was a little bit more of it, but I have to say it's very well done in the beginning, and it's nice to think that Heathcliff and Kathy are able to finally be together, even if it is only after death. And it's pretty haunting to think about how Emily died nearly a year exactly after Wuthering Heights was first published. During the time Emily Bronte wrote this, there were a lot of premature deaths, like I said, including her and her family. It makes sense that with so much death around her that she would be drawn to darker themes and a lot of death in her own writing. During the Victorian era, there were a lot of premature deaths, mainly due to the spread of infectious diseases like tuberculosis, or they also called that consumption, cholera, and especially for young children, smallpox, measles, and scarlet fever. And speaking of infectious diseases, for the last section of this video, I want to talk about the true villain of Wuthering Heights. So in the making of this video, there was one character I definitely had to talk about. I just did not know what to say. And in doing research, I was on JSTOR and I found this essay entitled The Villain of Wuthering Heights by James Hathley. Heathcliff is the anti-hero as well as the star of the show, but the villain of Wuthering Heights is no one other than the person telling the story, Nellie. With every read, I cannot help but question Nellie in the way she's telling the story, why she's telling the story, who she thinks she is telling the story, and when you think about it, at the end, who does Wuthering Heights seemingly belong to? Nellie. I was always confused as to why she is the narrator. It's not Heathcliff, it's not Kathy, it's Nellie. She's telling the story to Lockwood, and I have evidence to prove my point. In chapter 11, Kathy is on her deathbed and she calls Nellie out. She says, quote, "I see in you, Nellie, an aged woman. You have gray hair and bent shoulders. This bed is the fairy cave under Penistone Crag, and you are gathering elf bolts to hurt our heifers, pretending, while I am near, that they are only locks of wool. That's what you'll come to 50 years hence. I know you are not so now. Shake your head as you will, Nelly. You have helped to unsettle me. Ah, Nelly has played traitor. Nelly is my hidden enemy. You witch. You do seek elf bolts to hurt us. End quote. I get chills reading that, especially Nelly has played traitor. Nelly is my hidden enemy. One of the many reasons Kathy ends up getting as sick as she does is because Nelly lies to her about Edgar not caring about how well she's doing or not, causing Kathy to refuse to eat. There's another scene where Nelly is talking crazy about Kathy. The scene is there's already so much going on, but Nelly literally wishes death on Kathy. She says, quote, "She's fainted or dead, I thought. So much the better. Far better that she should be dead than lingering a burden and a misery maker to all about her." That is in chapter 15. In that scene, that's a scene where Kathy, she is very unwell, but Heathcliff is like determined to see her, but obviously he's not allowed in the house with Edgar. So Edgar ends up going somewhere, and then Heathcliff comes in. He's there for like hours, and then Edgar starts to come back, and Nellie's like freaking out because she's like, Heathcliff is still here, and like him and Kathy are like kissing and like all cuddled up, and Edgar's gonna come up the stairs and he's gonna see them, and it's gonna be a huge problem. There's already all that going on, so Nelly saying these things does kind of fall under the radar. And then after the somewhat funny scene, in my opinion, where Kathy has sadly passed and Heathcliff is looking at her casket, and he takes out Edgar's lock of hair from her locket and puts his own in, and then after he's left, Nelly ends up taking Edgar's lock of hair as well as Heathcliff's and puts it in there together. And as Hafley states, the author of the essay about the true villain the villain of Wuthering Heights, he says, quote, "Herself the agent of their tragedy," end quote. Also, when a few years have passed and young Kathy has grown up a little older, Nelly is the one that takes her to Wuthering Heights. She's the one that keeps having her and Linton meet, despite how Edgar says he does not want her going to Wuthering Heights. He didn't want them writing letters together. He didn't want any of that. But Nelly still encourages it, and she brings them together. Not only aiding Heathcliff in getting his revenge, but starting the snowball effect of how everything starts to go wrong, but right for Heathcliff. It could be argued that Nelly was, just trying to somewhat make up for how Kathy and Heathcliff weren't able to be together when they were young. So in young Kathy and Linton having this romance / friendship, that they, it's making up for Heathcliff and Kathy when they were younger. Me personally, I believe Nelly was doing it for her own personal gain and entertainment, because she wanted to go back to Wuthering Heights as well and be in everybody's business. Hafley makes a very, very, very good point when it comes to the death of Heathcliff. His death, yes, people say that his death is an anti-climax, and I guess I kind of agree with that, because it's like, it seems like everything would come to a head, and how it does is Heathcliff dies, and Nelly is the one that finds his body, and she says, quote, "I tried to close his eyes, to distinguish, if possible, that frightful, lifelike gaze of exaltation, before anyone else beheld it. They would not shut. They seemed to sneer at my attempt, and his parted lips and sharp white teeth sneered too. Taken with another fit of cowardice, I cried for Joseph. Joseph shuffled up and made a noise, but resolutely refused to meddle with him." End quote. And Hafley states, quote, "Only in death has Heathcliff been able to resist, to escape that meddling," end quote, from Nelly. And finally, The most prominent point to show just how villainous Nellie is, in my opinion, is the fact that she is the one telling the story. And instead of seeing it for what it is, a young child being brought into the very home she was in, being dehumanized and mistreated, Nellie herself calling Heathcliff an it for that first portion of when he's introduced in the book, him being so mistreated due to his race and class, growing up with so much anger and pain and grief inside him, and wanting to do nothing more but unleash that same grief and pain on everyone else. Nellie tells the story to Lockwood like it's gossip, not the genuine lives of the young people that Nellie has watched all grow up and die. Nellie is the true villain of Wuthering Heights. In conclusion, I really want to reread Wuthering Heights right now. It is right there. It's that one right there. If I didn't have this video planned to come out like soon, I would have reread it and then posted it, but I'm like, I just want to get it out. I've already read it 3 times. And the more I read and the more I look into Wuthering Heights and there's classics and Gothic classics in general, I understand how Wuthering Heights has come to be considered a classic. It's a story that sits with you and unsettles you a bit, and there are so many different interpretations on what the story is and why Emily Bronte wrote it and why it is the way it is. And like Wuthering Heights by Kate Bush or the atrocious movie that's coming out, it is a staple in literature and art and has inspired so many people, including myself, in speaking about it or having their own interpretations of it, and just so many different things. And especially when you consider that Emily Bronte passed away a year after its publication and it was initially not well received, it is a piece of art that a young woman imagined up nearly 200 years ago. And 200 years later, there are nerds on the internet talking about her amazing piece of work. Thank you so much for watching this video. Have you read Wuthering Heights? What do you think? Is it one of your favorites? Do you love it? Or do you kind of not like it so much? Do you think it's overhyped? I would love to know your opinion in the comments. And if you agree with me as well as James Hafley, and I recommend, I have all my sources in the description if you want to read that essay, and I read another one about revenge if you want to check it out. But yes, let me know your thoughts and what you think of Wuthering Heights. Thank you so much again for watching. If you want to see more of me, like I said in the beginning, and hear more of how good of a singer I am, you can check out my music channel and original music all under the name of Shy Fighter. Like if you want to like, subscribe if you want to subscribe, comment if you want to comment. I don't know, do whatever you would like to do. Thank you so much again for watching, and I will see you when I see you. Farewell.